Welcome to the reality show, day 159 of the war in Israel. So today we're talking about a story where a Palestinian, this is the headline in The Guardian, Palestinian citizen of Israel granted UK asylum in case said to be unprecedented. This is someone who argued he would face persecution in Israel on grounds of his race, faith, and its apartheid regime. So this is obviously somebody with an agenda, not an actual refugee as we or as we know the term, but of course Palestinians in general have their own definition of what a refugee is. So we're gonna get into that. We're going to try to figure out what the hell a Palestinian citizen of Israel is. I will have some sort of explanation, but I don't think is much, I don't think it clarifies it enough. Anyway, I'm joined by, this is an ARCUK behind the scenes panel, because everybody on the panel is also working in ARCUK behind the scenes. I'm joined by Daniel and Morgan. How's it going, guys?
Pretty good.
I'm surviving.
So, Daniel, I'll go to you first. Your initial thoughts on this
Well,
story.
first of all, you took my line because this story was posted by Morgan, and my first reaction was, "What the hell is a Palestinian citizen of Israel?" Uh, so when I read it, I always try to give some benefit of the doubt, and I'm increasingly more disappointed. So I was maybe thinking, okay, he's let's ignore the Palestinian part of Palestinian citizen of Israel, and let's just, does he have a case? And I was thinking, well, Israel has a conscription. Maybe he's trying to escape conscription, doesn't want to be part of the IDF. I think he's wrong, but I can understand it to some extent, and I think he even would have a case. Then I found out, maybe Razi can correct me, that the Arabs, even Arab citizens, don't have to serve in the IDF. Some do, but it's very few. I think it's only maybe 100 that sign up each year.
Yeah, they're not legally obliged to, and maybe that's what he meant by discrimination, because that is actual discrimination there.
Maybe he really wanted to. Uh, so yeah, and after that, I think that's all the sort of goodwill I was going to give him. I don't see any case, and I think it's really disappointing to see, UK like actually standing behind it. Because yeah, like I say, I don't think he has any case. We don't see any discrimination. I mean, something I haven't found out is where specifically he is from. Uh, so maybe that could clarify it a little bit. But I think that's all I have to say just about the asylum part. I cannot find any case for it. You have pro-Palestinian protests in Israel going, you have people going against IDF action, and none of them get arrested. We've only seen a couple of cases when someone was arrested. I mean, we talked about Tal Mitnick, for example, but that was for him trying to dodge the draft. It wasn't just like his ideas. Uh, so that's all I have to say
Yeah, and of course
for
his
that.
claims about the discrimination he's facing, much like every piece of Palestinian propaganda, is not actually based on a true story. It is based on whatever story will sell. And as we see, the British government, the conservative led British government, I think we should say that, kind of like we say Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry. We should say conservative run, and this is as a form of condemnation, to remind them that they are supposedly the more reasonable of the main parties, but then they go do something like this, which is in line with their policy on this war. Morgan.
Yeah, and so the Conservatives are viewed as the party that's friendly to Israel. And, there is this group, the Conservative Friends of Israel, that's fairly large and so on. And if there are politicians who are notably speaking up in support of Israel, they will come from the Conservatives. However, the conservative policy towards Israel, despite starting off, relatively good so far as the Western nations' responses started off, has declined, as you have seen with the US and all these other countries. And so for some background on this guy, we don't actually know who he is. The name or the moniker he's been given to protect his identity is Hassan, and he's 24. And the article reported that it's understood that he spent most of his life living in the UK. It seems like he was born in Israel and is Palestinian. Now, does that mean that he's of descent of Arab people who lived in this area, or what exactly does that mean? Again, it's tricky to put our finger on it, and maybe we'll talk about that.
Maybe just I can jump in because article has referred to there is a line in article about a fifth of Israel's population, about 2 million, is Palestinian. So it's not referring to some special case as is like, maybe his parents are from Gaza and he lives in Israel proper or something like that. No, the article seems to imply that all Arabs are Palestinian.
Okay. So yeah, but I think there's still tricky things. So I suppose it's using Palestinian as an ethnicity rather than a nationality, because if he's born in Israel, then even if he's Arab, he's Israeli, surely. But anyway, look, so we don't know necessarily who this guy is, but he's apparently spent most of his life in the UK, and the rationale is that he's claiming asylum to avoid being sent to Israel, and the case that he made was that if he goes to Israel, he's going to suffer a racist apartheid regime, right? And what was strange about this is that the Home Office was expected to basically challenge this, and his lawyers were going to have to go and make the case that this is what Israel was, and that's why he would need to claim asylum. And it wasn't expected that the Home Office would not challenge it. And they did, they completely caved. And that even the Guardian seems to report that in tones of shock. They weren't expecting it either. So there's a kind of implication in the article that maybe they did it because they didn't want to have to argue that Israel wasn't that. But then if that's true, then by conceding to it, then they're conceding that there is a credible reason to believe that Israel is that. And that's awful. I mean, that's truly awful. So I think this is a really disgraceful thing that the UK government has done. There's a cowardly bit of kind of line at the end where the Home Office releases a kind of statement on it saying, look, as more information comes to light, decisions can change. So, if this is too embarrassing, we'll change our minds. And, I hope they do, but it doesn't mean that this is okay.
So I do want to get into what a Palestinian Israeli is, but I'm going to leave that for later, because looking at the way this article is, the Guardian is called a newspaper, but this is not reporting of the news. This is for dramatic effect, they bullshit you in a kind of a tiered bullshit approach because they don't, they get to some of the stuff later on, but the headline, I think the Guardian assumes people don't read the whole thing. So the headline is Palestinian citizen of Israel granted UK asylum in case said to be unprecedented. And you think, wow, we finally got them. So there's something here that they did to this guy that is really such big news. And then the subheadline is Hassan, 24, argued he would face persecution in Israel on grounds of his race, faith, and its apartheid regime, which, I don't see why there's a third part of there if he's facing it. Then later on, you read that he has actually, gone to the streets in London and celebrated October 7th. And of course, this is not how the Guardian puts it, but that is what those protests are, and demanded more such action. But even that, this whole we had to hide his identity because the Mossad is after every 24-year-old idiot going out in London and chanting from the river to the sea. I mean, so the Guardian is trying to create a story from nothing, even if there is a story here, which we will get to. Daniel.
I'm not sure if I have much more to say. Well, something that actually you brought to my mind that I thought you might go into, and the fact that he might be facing prosecution. I mean, maybe there is a case to be made if you have like Israeli citizens, going to this pro-Palestinian protest, which are basically celebrating October 7 attack. Maybe there is a case for it, but clearly the current Israeli state has no like is not going to do anything about it. As I said, there are protests even in Israel. As you said, it's you're not gonna see Mossad anytime soon. I mean, Mossad has a problem with killing actual terrorists in bordering countries, I don't. I think some protesters are pretty far down on the list. Which I'm still waiting. There's what's the guy's names? The terrorist. I'm still waiting to hear the confirmation about if Marwan Issa was actually killed by IDF. So if it happens, I'm definitely gonna announce it on the show. But it
Yeah,
seems like
let's
nothing
hope
so
so. I
far.
tend to be pessimistic about these, Mohammed Deif, one of the leaders of Hamas. I heard multiple times, oh, there was an
It's
assassination attempt and he's probably dead. I remember like I was listening on the radio and they said 99% dead. Well, he's not dead to this day.
yeah, we talked about it yesterday on the show, and I had a note of it 7 times, 7 assassination attempts so
Yeah, so
far.
let's hope it doesn't take this guy that long. But anyway, Morgan.
So I think it's important for people to realize when you hear the kind of pro-Palestinian side put forward, straight away there are so many ideas baked into it that are just faulty. And so I mentioned on TDO before that I was reading an essay collection by Chomsky and Ilan Pappé, if I'm saying his name correctly. And the first essay in that collection is one called Old Conversations and New, where he's describing what he views as deficient with the old kind of peace movement, pro-Palestine movement that's in favor of a two-state solution and the peace process and so on. And he very consciously articulates we need to use a new kind of language. And he says we need to use the term apartheid modeled on the Campaign for Solidarity around South Africa. And we need to support the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. And we need to focus in on the idea of racism and all this kind of stuff. And what comes across in the way he talks about it is the way in which these ideas are tools and which are judged by how effective they are, or they will be in achieving their goals. Not the primary focus is not on whether it's true. It's on how effective that idea will be. And I think that idea has proved to be very effective, rightly or wrongly. And it's the first idea that comes up here for this guy to be claiming asylum. And so if your goal is to undermine the moral superiority of Israel, if you can make it seem like a low and dirty apartheid state like apartheid South Africa was, then you're going to be really successful in doing that. And that's exactly the same thing that's going on with the case by, excuse me, I've got a chest infection. With the case by South Africa against Israel in the International Court of Justice. There's no credible reason to believe that what's going on is a genocide. Study any real genocide, study the genocide that was waged against the Jews and some other groups in Nazi Germany. And it doesn't even compare. And so these ideas are used in a way to prey upon people's sloppy thinking and to undermine the case for Israel in a completely malign and cynical way. And people need to pay attention to that.
Morgan, you have a chest infection. You're reading Chomsky and Pape at the same time. I'm not a doctor, but it doesn't sound, mind and body are connected. And yeah, I don't want to hear from ARCUK's HR department that, you know, research for this show is making things worse. But yeah, you touched on a thing in the article here that I want to address, which was they avoided the hearing. Um, so it said, so avoiding a hearing in which his legal team were intending to argue that Palestinian citizens of Israel were unsafe, and in particular, those that were willing to speak out. Now, of course, we know this is completely untrue. Arab Israelis are not under any threat unless they commit a crime or actually cooperate with terrorists. I have a different view on what should be done about protests during a time of war, but they are currently allowed. You will get away with it. You're gonna be fine in terms of persecution. Maybe decent human beings won't want to associate with you, but that is generally the case if you hold these views. So all of this is completely fabricated, but it makes you wonder, like, what was the Home Office actually afraid of a situation where 20% of Israel's population would be eligible for asylum? I mean, how else could you look at it? And that seems to be what at least his lawyers were going to try, the precedent that they were going to try to set. Daniel, you have some legal experience being the judge in ARC UK's mock trials for platinum members and above. Membership link in the description in the chat. Your thoughts on this as our legal expert?
Yeah, so I was researching. I mean, okay, we still are not gonna talk about the Palestinian citizens of Israel, but I was researching the Arab Israelis to like find, okay, is there actually any case for anything he says? So as you said, it's 20% of the population. They have their own parties. They pretty much. I don't think it's in the constitution that like explicitly that all minorities are protected or something like that, but it's clear from the law, and as I mentioned earlier, they even have exemptions. Pretty much, I don't think any minority. I think it's only the Jews who actually have a obligation to serve for the IDF. None of the other minorities have. Some do it more frequently. I think Arabs specifically do it the least frequently. So yeah, I mean, you mentioned you mentioned that they might make a case that all of them could get out. I mean, they're really fighting on both fronts. On one side, they want the unlimited right of return. They want all of them back, but on the same time, they want all of them to get out. Like, uh, I yeah, it's I'm like I'm always trying to give everything like benefit of the doubt, but with like story like this, it's hard to find like any case for this. Like I'm really trying hard to like give him any sort of like justification just to be Stillman whatever argument he's making. Uh, but I'm really struggling to find. Maybe they might bring examples of like some Palestinians or Arabs being oppressed, whatever. Uh, but whenever that happens, there's always like something that happened before. There's no like in a vacuum, Israel is just coming after like random Arabs and arresting them just because they're Arab. Whenever there is any kind of actions, there's always something precedenting it. You know, e even if it's October 7th or any kind of other attack.
Kirsten suggests in the chat, this is not a bid for better benefits. I mean, I don't know on an individual level, but yeah, from Morgan's face, I think he agrees with me that I don't think that's likely. Also, as an asylum seeker, you have like restrictions on you, and I don't know that you really get great benefits. I think it's better to be in the UK and unemployed and legally just apply for that kind of benefit. But yeah, I mean, it's a bit difficult to see it on an individual level at all. I think this is all, seeing it as part of how Palestinian propaganda works. I mean, we can see this the way the Guardian reported it, as I mentioned. They make it over dramatic. They say things in the headlines that they don't actually, so that they contradict in the body of the article about whatever danger this guy supposedly faced. But Morgan, your thoughts?
So David Cameron, since he recently became the foreign secretary and so re-entered government, has been quite critical of Israel. Now, he's said the things that you have to say as a Western politician about Israel's right to defend itself, right? But the overarching tone of what he's been saying and what he's been saying amounts to has been to undermine Israel's right to defend itself, and it's been very critical of Israel. And he's been recently criticized by some conservative politicians for kicking out or lashing out too often at Israel. So the Foreign Office has been told to stop taking swipes at Israel. So now it seems to be the Home Office's turn. It goes from the Foreign Office to the Home Office, and there's no way that the Home Office can avoid the fact that it takes a side on this. Either it interrogates those claims and evaluates whether they're true or not, or if it concedes to them, then it is just admitting that this is true. And Israel should take this as a huge insult that the UK is doing this. Like, this is just truly outrageous. If you think about what the status of a black person was in apartheid South Africa, it was appalling. There's a reason why someone like Pape is tried to get this word in common usage, and now it is, and why it's been so effective, because it was awful. And my understanding of the rights of these 20% in Israel is that a black person in apartheid South Africa could only have wished to have enjoyed that kind of legal standing. So it's such it's such an insult to Israel, but it's such a denigration of what happened in South Africa and how serious that was. And, when people use terms instrumentally like this just to achieve whatever goal they want, whether it's right or wrong, I think it's appalling. And for the UK government to be giving any credence to anything like this is just disgusting. And there's been some reporting on this in the national newspapers, but I haven't seen an uproar about this, and there damn well should be. Why is it that he fears that he's going to be deported back to Israel? There doesn't seem to be any reason to think that's going to happen. There's no reason to expect he's going to be under any threat. So this story, stinks all the way through.
Yeah, every part of it is, classic made-up Palestinian propaganda, which you would expect the Guardian to reprint, but you wouldn't expect the government to take part in such an active way. And the irony of this is that, London, one day a week nowadays is a no-go zone for Jews. I mean, it really has become a place where Jewish people should be afraid. And, there are certainly, and I'm not talking about if you walk through East London with a yarmulke or a flag of Israel. You can walk with a PLO flag of an actual terrorist organization, and you'll be fine. Try walking through East London for 5 minutes with an Israel flag. You will not make it. So the British government and the Home Office specifically should look into people who are in danger in their own countries. And the first country they should look to is the UK.
I mean, I would just bring like the whole idea. I mean, like the fact that you could have like a citizen and is like in an apartheid regime, like these two concepts don't work together. If you are a citizen, it makes no sense. I was just quickly researching the South Africa and how exactly it worked there. Yeah, it's not like the black people in South Africa had a right to vote or were considered citizens. They were like this separate group. Like that's what it means, apartheid, like separate. Like I how could you look at Israel? You have Arab political parties, you have Arab, I read Arabs at the Supreme Court, Arabs, in all walks of life, in all different professions, and calling it apartheid. I mean, all of them are pretty much all Arabs are citizens. I think I read something like there's like a something different when it comes to Jerusalem. Maybe Razi if he yeah.
I mean, so yeah, there's the Arabs who lived in Israel and who are part of the state of Israel, and then there are what we call the Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria in the West Bank of the Gaza Strip. And yeah, they're not citizens. Palestinians are not citizens, and maybe we'll get now to the try to define what it is. I mean, I don't know the exact status in East Jerusalem, but East Jerusalem was annexed by Israel. So it is not territory that Israel considered under occupation with potentially becoming a future Palestinian state. It is territory that Israel officially is not, it's not giving back ever. So people there have some sort of status, and people in the Golan Heights, I believe, are full citizens because.
So in Jerusalem, I think they are permanent residents.
All right. So if he's from East Jerusalem, then we can talk. But of course, that's neither here nor there because they do have full rights there. Maybe the one thing they don't have is the right to vote. And we. Okay, let's get to what a Palestinian is, and it depends on who you're asking and when you're asking. Because certainly, if you ask before 1948, Palestinian was everybody who lived in the British controlled part of that's called Palestine, including Jews. After that, nobody was really this was not a thing. People were not talking about the Palestinian cause, the Palestinian people until Yasser Arafat started the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, whose flags you see everywhere now. He became popular because he managed to carry out successful terrorist attacks, and the Palestinian people became the Palestinian people around that time. So Israeli citizens, you hear them sometimes self-identify as Palestinians. The only times that happens is within the context of a political cause, and it's usually the cause of, we are Palestinians, this is our country, Israel should not be here. I saw what's his name? I forget his name. The activist, human rights activist who used to be pro-Palestinian and turned into pro-Israel. I will look up his name. Bassem Eid. That is, I've seen him self-identify as Palestinian who is pro-Israel. But generally, you will hear that used only even by him. It's in the context of, I'm a Palestinian Israeli in favor of Israel. You'll hear that only in the context of political arguments. Arabs in Israel are Arab Israelis, and that's how they identify and are identified. So this goes back to this is an extra piece of the propaganda puzzle.
Yeah, I mean, so when it comes to the term Palestinian, yeah, it always just meant, the people who reside in this region. And as you said, there were Palestinian Jews, there were Palestinian Christians, there were Palestinian Muslims. Uh, and some people try to make a case, there was this Palestinian identity like almost always. It makes no sense. I mean, nationalism as a concept is pretty modern. I mean, if you went, just a couple hundred years back and you went into the region of Germany, if you said, oh, all these people are Germans, it makes no sense. There was no such a thing. And similar here, there were no, Palestinian Muslims in the region that identified some specifically with with specifically like that region. It was always much more about religion. That's where it was always much more about excluding specifically the Jews, and we are the Muslims. But and even when you go later, after the Israeli Declaration of Independence, it's not like right after that there was established some sort of Palestinian state. No, the Palestinian people were happy to live under Egypt or Jordan. Uh, there was no push. There was only push after Israel in the Six Day War kicked out these countries out. Then there was a push for some sort of Palestinian state because they viewed it as, well, now this is the best way to fight against Jews. But before that, there was no problem. There was no sort of push for a Palestinian identity, Palestinian state under Egypt and Jordan.
Yeah, nor was there a demand as part of the peace deal with Egypt that the Gaza Strip become, self-run or a state, nor by Jordan about the West Bank. So, Mugiwara says Balfour Declaration is what protects all religions and minorities in Israel. Yeah, there's also the basic laws. The basic laws, I don't remember how many of them, I think 12, but that's off the top of my head, are the laws in Israel that are basically meant to be the basis for the future constitution. The first one, I think, was in the late 40s or early 50s, so I'm sure that written constitution is just about to be delivered. But anyway, they are kind of above the other laws, but have no are not formally part of the Constitution yet. Morgan.
I mean, just to nail down this issue about Palestinian identity. So as you say, my understanding is that under the British Mandate, everyone who lived there was considered Palestinian. And there's this quote that occasionally floats around from Golda Meir that when she was born in the 20s, she considered herself a Palestinian. And I think is the point that after 1948, and with the creation of the PLO and all this stuff, there's been a conscious attempt to create a distinct Palestinian identity for the Arabs in the region. And that's kind of phony, and that's not quite ever been the case. Is that the point, Razi?
Yeah, can you repeat the last part?
So like there's been an attempt since, so that before the creation of Israel, when it was all under the British Mandate, everyone there was considered Palestinian, and that's what Golda Meir said about herself, that she was Palestinian when she was a young girl. But then,
yeah, and also that there was a distinction, but the distinction was Arabs and Jews. Again, I guess this is just an easier sell to the world. That's my understanding.
Sure. And I mean, Daniel, you asked how can people use this comparison honestly with apartheid and all this kind of stuff. And I think the answer is just that they aren't being honest. They can't use it honestly. When it occurs to them to say that, did it occur to them, look, we've really investigated this and we think X, Y, and Z about the legal system makes it an apartheid system? Pretty much all the people who you hear throwing that term around, I don't think can do that. I think what occurred to them was, yeah, that'll be a good thing to say, as in that'll be effective. And that is the tone of Pape's essay as well. Now, there's a number of claims that he makes, and I want to kind of look into those, but it isn't that I think they're credible. I think they're a cover. So I don't think people are able to use this term apartheid honestly at all. And now it's funny because you can't use the term apartheid really to apply to a place like Gaza because there are no Jews there. You couldn't apartheid them because they can't be there. And Jonathan's made the point that in the West Bank you aren't allowed to sell your land if you're a Palestinian to any of the Jews, and he suggested that the penalty for that was death. So it isn't like you could honestly be judging this and thinking that Israel is an apartheid state from which you need asylum in the UK. And so I think this is just dishonesty all the way down.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, there were Jews in Muslim countries, and most of them were, well, almost all of them were pretty much kicked out. So yeah, there is no apartheid in any of the neighboring Arab countries, is because they kicked out any Jews they had, or some of them left. But
well, and in lots of these countries, there used to be Jewish populations back in the day, and now they aren't there anymore. And why aren't they there anymore? So, but did you guys have any other thoughts about this article or about the UK?
Well, so the guy's lawyer said that, or is it his lawyer anyway? A lawyer said while it was not uncommon for Palestinians from Gaza to obtain asylum in the UK, he could not find reference to a similar case applying to a Palestinian from Israel. Yeah, maybe because it literally, in terms of what asylum is, it makes no sense. And also, this case was brought before October 7th. And then it was, adapted to the times, I guess, to make it, to say, okay, Palestinians are worse off. But again, the article does mention that this guy, is not just being discriminated for things that he happens to have been born with, but rather, he has certain views that he's expressed all along, and this kind of is not one of the reasons he says he's going to be discriminated against, but it's something that the article sees as something they should mention. So, yeah, I try to think, and I have nothing off the top of my head, but I'm trying to think what somebody could say about the U.S., about France or any country that they've decided to leave and come to the UK, and how would the UK handle that? I mean, this is, even if they manage to skirt the issue of setting a precedent by actually going into the details, because let me just quickly say that this was the Home Office. This is from the article. The Home Office did not give any reasons for accepting Hassan's asylum claim when it withdrew its objections on Monday. When contacted on Tuesday, officials said they did not routinely comment on individual cases. So, yeah, it's interesting to see people will have heard of this story and will try their own thing, and it's interesting to see where we're going with that, Morgan.
So people should also be aware. There's this figure who isn't really well known in the UK anymore. Or he might be well known, but he's not notable in UK political life. And I think he's just been sent back to jail, actually. Is this guy called Anjem Choudary, who was one of the sort of very notable Islamic street preachers 10 or 20 years ago. And he was arrested, I want to say around 2017 or 2015 for having been the head of a terrorist group. He went to jail. He got out and sort of didn't retain his high profile, and he's just gone back for a similar thing. And very famously, he was on a interview on Newsnight, which is this popular interview show that used to be hosted by Jeremy Paxman before he retired. And he was interviewed opposite Maajid Nawaz, who was a great kind of counterpoint to his point of view. And that interview was infamous because what Anjem Choudary did, aside from the fact that he basically implicitly said that Maajid Nawaz would be executed as an apostate in his ideal Islamic Britain of the future, was that he claimed that the UK was an apartheid state against Muslims. Now, why did he say that? Not because there exists any legal structure that discriminates against Muslims, but because it was convenient for him to say. And, there might have been, so there definitely is resentment against Muslims amongst certain parts of the country as a result of the terrorist attacks and all this kind of stuff. And any, standard Muslim who gets grief about that, that's not okay. But he doesn't really care about that. He was completely exploiting that to further his cause. And that was naked. And people understood that when he said it, that's completely rubbish. That you can't claim that the UK is an apartheid state against Muslims. And yet they seem to be doing it here. And it should strike people that this is exactly the same kind of claim being made in exactly the same kind of bogus way.
Yeah, one thing I would say about this calls for apartheid, it really shows there's no, because what does apartheid imply? I mean, if you are someone of that demographic, let's say you're a Muslim, and someone keeps telling you you're living under apartheid regime, well, what's the way to fight apartheid regime? Well, if you're under apartheid, you have no right to vote, right? You have no rights, so you should go and fight, go on the streets, protest, riot, whatever you can do, just so you are acknowledged. It really like promotes a certain way of action instead of let's say there was some discrimination against Muslims or some minorities or something. You can acknowledge it, and if you have a right to vote, you can try to fight it. If you have a freedom of speech, you can try to fight it this way. But once you say we are living under tyranny, once you say we are living under apartheid, there is no other means of peaceful action. You have to go and riot. You have to go and fight. There is no other way. So yeah, I think this sort of anyone who preaches apartheid or something is not interested in any sort of reform or peaceful action. They want violence. They want something radical to happen. They want something to change.
Yeah, generally the fact that people, promoting this cause go out of their way to say that which is not true, should make people question everything that such people say and what their real agenda is. Mad Max says in the chat, 10,000 Jews live in Iran today. That's a good example of apartheid. I mean, they do have the right to vote, right? They have a representative in parliament, the Jew, like the token, like the literal, there's a Jew seat in parliament. And yeah, they live in a very closed community and everything, but they're allowed to live for now. Yeah, I believe Owen Jones did about 15 videos in the last week about Jews being oppressed in Iran. Oh no, actually, he's just doing pro-terrorist propaganda. Yeah,
Wait, I have to super chat.
Oh yeah. By the way, unlike reading Ilan Pape and Noam Chomsky, what really would help Morgan with his chest infection is super chats. That is a well-known cure. So there's still 20 more minutes of the show, so there's time for that. Yeah, well, I had another point about the article, but give me a second with that, Daniel or Morgan.
Morgan, do you have something?
Well, I mean, Jess, I guess to just hammer the point home, because whether people are talking about apartheid or whatever, when people are supporting these kind of causes where it doesn't add up, so that, I said this article stinks from beginning to end, and the whole kind of argument that we're seeing against Israel stinks from beginning to end. It doesn't really match up to the facts on the ground at all. Because they can't explain properly and fully why they're supporting the cause that they're supporting from the perspective that they'd like to support it from, which is that, the Palestinian cause is a cause of justice and freedom and equality and all this kind of stuff. They have to bring in supplementary ideas in order to make that seem more plausible, not only to the people they're trying to convince, which is the perspective from which Pape's arguing, but they need to bring it in to make it more convincing to themselves. Because, so for example, another comparison, when people talk about the idea of October 7th was resistance to oppression, and so violence was being used against them and they were just retaliating, that's not credible at all. And how do you explain the fact of all the rapes that went on and the mutilations and all that awful, awful stuff? And you can't. And the reason why they try and frame it as resistance is because October 7th was so terrible. And yet they need to have a way that they can frame it in their mind as being part of the narrative that this is a oppressed minority who are trying to save themselves. And then you see awful, awful people going around on Twitter saying, "Yeah, October 7th was bad, wasn't it? But but you're in favor of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising," and it's not even comparable. And those people are utterly disgusting, and they need to come up with all these kind of things to keep the plate spinning in their head before they all come crashing down. And so you'll see these kind of palaces in the sky that they construct becoming more and more elaborate. And people should be on the lookout for that kind of stuff all the time when it comes to these kind of political causes. But it's all over the place with Israel. There's so many of these. And if you go read that collection on Palestine, buy it secondhand like I did, in the introduction, in the first essay, like they're littered literally from like the first sentence all over the place. And it's to frame it in the way that's more conducive to their point of view, so they don't have to, so they can evade the real, pieces of scum that they are and the scummy cause that they're supporting.
Yeah, and we talked about the different ways in which they do that. Of course, the most popular one nowadays is to like they can't go through a whole sentence without using the word genocide. Of course, the argument that Israel is committing genocide is ridiculous across the board. In terms of like this is not what a genocide would look like in terms of numbers. Even if you take Hamas numbers, which of course we've spoken about those, and we'll do that some more. But also in the sense that you are talking about a conflict between a country that has been building an amazing society while surrounded by people who just want to kill it, in conflict with a society that exists only for the purpose of wiping society, the first one off the map. So it's really it is blaming the victim for that which they are the victim of. But we talked about how headlines, how they seem to shift policy on an almost daily basis. Thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. Morgan, you and Mark were talking about Ireland. Ireland is one of the countries that, when UNRWA was first investigated, doubled down and increased their donations. But of course, the EU has reversed course, as we've talked about. Sweden has also reversed course. There's another country there that I'm forgetting.
Spain.
Who?
Spain,
Canada.
I believe.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, Canada.
And
Spain, wasn't Spain always what did they ever cut their funding?
could be.
But yeah, with the EU, it came out immediately after the Flower Massacre blood libel by the Palestinians that the West bought into, and immediately that affected the headline. So you have to ask, first of all, would this guy's asylum request have been approved on October 6th? And also, what does it say that the Home Office immediately accepts this while the guy says he's coming from a country that is governed by an apartheid regime? Is this now the official position of the UK government that Israel is an apartheid regime?
I mean, I don't see how you can take it any other way. And that's what I was trying to say when I say they're giving credence to this. And that's why, so there's no reporting in the articles yet from Israeli spokespeople. And once we're done here, I'm going to be looking at Eylon Levy's Twitter and Mark Regev and all these people, although Mark Regev isn't in his position anymore. But you know what I mean. I'm going to be looking at those representatives to see what they say, particularly what Tzipi Hotovely says, since she's here in the UK. And they should be completely outraged. It isn't okay just to throw around apartheid. It's very, very serious. And to be coming from the UK, which is Israel's ally, or is supposed to be, it's a serious insult. And the peculiar part of the article, well, one of many peculiar parts, is the bit where the UK government, so as you said, would it have been approved on October the 6th? They had these objections to it, and they weren't just going to let this case through, is what the context seems to be. And then they were all withdrawn. And so it seems, the way that sounds, and maybe this will change as we get more information about it, is that the word came down from on high to allow this. And if that's true, why did that happen? Who was it who did that? Was it from James Cleverly, who's the Home Secretary, or was it from some no-name permanent secretary civil servant who are, all just a bit malicious? And once we find out this, whoever made that decision, this should be taken as a serious kind of, foreign policy disaster. We should not be doing this to Israel, particularly in its time of need right now. We shouldn't be doing it in peacetime either, but we shouldn't be doing it right now. It's truly disgraceful.
I remember watching Israeli television a long time ago, the news, and there was, so in Israel, you have, parliament, and you have government ministers. I don't remember what the current law says about how many of them have to be members of parliament as well, but in the past it was almost all ministers were members of parliament. And you always had to have somebody from the government sitting in on a session of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. Now, sometimes they had no idea what they were doing, and I remember there was one time when somebody was sitting there just as a representative of the government, not really paying attention. Some bill was introduced, and he was asked by the speaker, "Does the government have a position on this?" And he said yes, without knowing what that meant. And what that meant was that this became a de facto confidence vote, which meant if the government loses, there's no more government, or they're out basically. So that long story is basically I'm wondering to what extent somebody here said, yeah, let's get rid of this as quickly as possible. This is how they got rid of it without realizing they're officially calling Israel an apartheid state, without realizing that they're opening the door for, 20% of Israel's population, nearly 2 million people, to have a case for asylum in the UK. Maybe that's what the conservatives should run on in their general election campaign. We will import the Palestinians, thus saving them. I'm sure they will, find that opinion popular in some circles.
Well, as a long-time viewer of yes minister and yes prime minister, I really hope something like this happen. I mean, that's really the only redemption I can really see, because yeah, what else could it imply? So yeah, I really hope it's just something, stupid like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's worth saying that, Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister is a TV show about how civil servants run rings around ministers and get the ministers to do what they want, really. And if you read sort of accounts of time in government departments from former politicians, and there's loads of these that come out as soon as they retire, they strike a book deal. Very often what they talk about is how they would like to do something, and then the civil service is minded otherwise, and they will kind of go behind their back to undermine them, or they'll just wear them down, or completely go against them. And so if this turns out not to be true as we get more information, then that's fine. But the civil service is drawn from a pool of people who are quite left-leaning, and I would have to imagine are probably quite pro-Palestinian and would probably quite like to have seen this happen. So if this came down from the civil service, did they do this basically because it furthered their cause? Now, if that's true, that's disgraceful, and it's also not allowed. They're not allowed to act on their political opinions. But since it doesn't seem to make sense coming from the UK government ministers, although they've been increasingly critical of Israel, this is a truly disastrous move, and I'd be shocked. This definitely isn't coming down from Sunak, I'd have to think, and I'd be shocked if it was coming from James Cleverly, really. So if this was coming from some team that was put on this, or some permanent secretary or undersecretary, then this should be an utter scandal, and it needs to be looked into. Because how did this happen? we'll find out eventually, I presume. But it's it's an utter scandal that this has happened.
And if it is given its appropriate status as an utter scandal, and it in any way helps, um, you know, kind of chew away at the status of civil servants in the UK, that would be a good thing. I mean, yeah, I haven't watched Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister. I do see clips from time to time. I like the 2000th version of it, the thick of it, or the it's not a version of it, but there's an appropriate amount of swearing there, and I think if I was in politics, I would swear that much. So I kind of enjoyed that show, even though the guy speaks with a Scottish accent that I can't understand. No offense, Morgan, and our many viewers in Scotland. So there's just to hammer home this point. There's uh yeah, it was Hassan's belief, his lawyer said, that Israel was governed by, quote, an apartheid regime that engages in systematic and pervasive discrimination, persecution, and violence touching on all aspects of Palestinian life. Now, we're kind of repeating this point, but it's important to repeat all these words are what the UK government officially accepted by granting this asylum. That is what is meant by that. Um,
So I just say, still the idea of like Palestinian Israeli citizen confuses me. So he said the Israel government, it touches on all you know all forms of what was the quote again? Just so I can say it exactly.
the one
It it touches upon something.
where is that? I don't know. Sorry, it's not
All
the
right.
thing.
Basically that the government of Israel influences all aspects of life of Palestinians, and so when I heard it, I'm like, yeah, good. They are in an active war. Palestinians shouldn't really be, IDF shouldn't really hold back against Palestinians right now. But of course, I think what he actually meant is he talked about the actual Arab citizens. And again, I mean, at this point, we're just repeating ourselves. I don't see any case for any of this. And again, I think any sort of acknowledgement of this uh, is really dangerous because, yeah, the only way you fight this sort of oppression is, yeah, what they did on October 7th. If Israel is an apartheid regime, whatever they did isn't wrong according to such a statement.
Yeah. Mugiwara says in the chat, one state solution, but in the UK, LOL. No thanks. Not funny. No. Just yeah.
Well, my
I
favorite one was a two-state solution, but it's like we put Taiwan in Quebec and China in the rest of Canada. So this way you solve all the problems.
When I was in my second year of university, the first time I went along to a political debating society, I was kind of new, and the first topic they were debating was Israel Palestine, and the person kind of called on me to say something, and it's interesting that actually my opinions then, although I was far less informed about the conflict, interestingly didn't default to the standard view that people seem to take, which is the pro-Palestinian line. I was interestingly sort of in favor of the Israelis and against the sort of Oslo Accord two-state solution. And what I proposed be done to solve the conflict is that the Palestinians are all moved to Montenegro and let them deal with the problem, which got a suitable round of applause. But we shouldn't inflict that on the Montenegrins. It's not fair. So, but yeah, since you said that, Danny, I just
maybe
thought I'd mention
Serbia.
they have a bit of a history with this kind of
Yeah,
thing.
they
Yeah.
have a much worse history with ethnic minorities.
Yeah.
I mean, because we still have like 5 points, I'm just gonna make my general point when it comes to the so-called two-state solution. Well, if there is at any point like someone arguing, well, we should have two-state solution. Well, who do you negotiate it with? You have to have like some sort of representation from both sides. And no one on the Palestinian side wants a two-state solution. If there was an election, they would elect Hamas again. They overwhelmingly support Hamas. They don't want their own state if it means Jews get a state too.
Yeah. By the way, for more on that point, watch yesterday's episode of the reality show. And yeah, it's oh, I was going to make this point. So I see, and I haven't read all of it, but I see some debate in the chat about who was there first. The Palestinians were there, and then the Zionists came there, but the Jews were there, but the Romans kicked them out. None of that really matters when you're judging a conflict. And what makes this the easiest conflict to judge is not the fact that Moses spoke to God and God, whatever. That's not what this conflict is. There are people there who built a country from scratch while being shot at the whole time, which is now, a leading force in the world, even though it's a small country, a leading force in, not the military sense, but in the actually creating value for human life sense. And there's a society that wants nothing but to kill the former. So, I was at a talk by Yaron Brook a couple of hours ago here in London, and he mentioned this, how in the disengagement in 2005, when Israel went in to Gaza with full force to take the Jews out of there, the Jewish settlements, the villages there, they left all this infrastructure, all this, it was an agricultural powerhouse. The Palestinians, as soon as the Jews left, went there and destroyed everything. Like this is as they do today with the aid trucks. We hear about how they're starving and then they lynch aid truck drivers. So yeah, the case for Israel is not what happened 2,000 years ago. It's what's happening right now and who Israel is fighting against.
Yeah, there were as was it an extensive network of greenhouses or something that they destroyed as soon as all the Jews left, is if I'm remembering that right. But yeah, no, you're right. The case we've made on this channel is not that this is the historic homeland of the Jews and therefore it belongs to the Israelis. That's not how we've been framing it. It's that Israel is a fundamentally just and free society which any Palestinian should wish to live in. Or if they if they want their own state, they should wish to have a state that's modeled on that, not on some kind of Islamic authoritarianism. And so one thing that people might bring up to try and rationalize the apartheid claim, not that you can or that there's any credible reason to believe this, is they might bring up some bad thing that the Israeli government has done. It isn't, and so to maintain the case that Israel is the fundamentally right side in this, Israel doesn't have to be absolutely perfect and spotless and never have done anything wrong. It has to be the fundamentally free and just society. Western countries, like America, the UK, aren't spotless, free, spotless and completely good countries. There's lots of mixed cases, and it's about what's fundamentally true of them. And so these people will find any small little thing and take it out of context and try and use that to rationalize this claim. And people should also be aware of that because that kind of thing will go on as well.
Daniel, final thoughts?
I mean, I already had my final thought a moment ago, but I just been built upon Morgan's point. Yeah, when you look at countries like this, look at what is the country's reaction to when, let's say, bad things happen. When maybe there is some bad actions from the IDF, or maybe even some rapes occur. These people are punished. These people are go to war courts. Yeah, they are punished. Nothing like this is ever rewarded. What happens when Palestinians go kill civilians, brutally rape civilians? Well, they celebrate on the streets. This is the difference between these two cultures, and that's what has to be considered whenever you talk about this conflict. What is the reaction of cultures, and what is the reaction of their respective authorities?
Yeah, and I'll just say generally again, this is a step up in the West's abandonment of Israel, because this is an attack on Israel's internal politics, which is, and again, based on an absolute lie. So yeah, we've been hearing about how bad things are in Gaza and so on, and somebody escaping from there, that would be a different story. But even that, we hear false information about that, and that has had its results, and this unfortunately will have its results as well. We will be talking about the other topic and why it's not what it seems to be tomorrow on the Daily Objective. The topic is debunking Gaza's humanitarian crisis. So yeah, that should be a good one. Make sure you tune in and share. Thank you, Apollo Zeus, and thank you, Daniel, for the super chats. Thanks, Daniel, and thanks, Morgan. And I'll see you guys tomorrow.